That was Martha. And the community dinner tonight, we've been, if you're familiar with Craig Lane's life, two ladies important to me have moved to Mount Shasta with Kelly Deary, and Kelly's doing her Friday thing also, I believe. And I hope at some point, and one of my visions is to have like hundreds or thousands of community dinners, and we all have a Zoom sort of meetup, and we might have one representative from each community dinner, if there's like 20 or 30 of them, and they represent sort of the group. So behind me, this is a screenshot of one of the poppies growing in my garden. It's one of the plants I love growing. Every year I look forward to them. And this year I didn't have to plant one seed. There was, it's just a good example of nature's abundance, folks. And it's really what the people, the beings, the whatevers in control of this planet that are losing control very quickly, or have been for a number of years. We don't really know because we're not at that top level, but they don't want us to know there's free medicine. Like I tell people, ivermectin. Well, what's the process ivermectin's facilitating? Because all we're talking about is life is a dance. Life's not a series of still images. Life's not a series of chemical reactions. That's all the fallacy we've been told. And I grew up with the MTV generation, for example, and so a lot of flickering images, right? And that really kind of wreaks havoc with your subconscious, your limbic system. And so life is actually a movement. It's a dance, like my glasses feel a little bit off. So I want to get this urge to fix my glasses. And then you take a photograph of me doing that. Looks funny, right? But the photograph isn't us. The chemical symbols aren't the real thing. They're pointing at phenomena. And so what you see behind you there is a top shot. Look at the camera looking down on one of the poppies, and you can see a strawberry, on that side, strawberry, and on the other side over here, it's the opposite. Over here, you see the head. Is my pointer thing? I don't know if you can see my pointer, but over here, it would be to your right, to my left, you would see this. So here's one that's beginning, and here's one that hasn't started yet over here on the far, far, far right of the screen. One hasn't popped up yet. And so what they do is there's one that's getting ready to open right there, just to the right of the poppy head. So life's a process. This is the plant's way of reproducing. So you could say the flower is the plant's way of having sex. It's nature's way of having sex. But sex is reproduction. It's sort of like an urge that all species have to reproduce. It's an innate thing, and humans have it. And the man's supposed to be, ideally the pursuer. The image I grew up with was the caveman dragging the lady along by the hair. And, not real good, healthy image to plant in there, but that's kind of the way I guess it was, or maybe it was, we don't know. I wasn't a caveman, I wasn't there, so therefore I cannot say in any authenticity. But what you see here is this plant. This is like foreplay right here, the plant over here on the right. And then it's getting erect, the one closer to the screen right here. Then they get erect and this little capsule pops off, and then this flower opens up. And that's like the plant's sex. It's sending out pheromones, attracting insects. There's not enough bees in this neighborhood. If there were enough bees around, there would be 3 or 4 or 5 bees in each of these flowers when they open in the morning. But I didn't have a massive bloom this year. I'm sort of staggering it as this is what I was saying, is these seeds just sprouted up in little pots that I carried from one house to the other. We moved in February, Gene and Bernie and I, so they're up in Shasta. And I carried the legacy of what I've been carrying around now for 25 years, plants in pots, basically, or I plant a garden, and then, in the last house, for example, the garden is gone. So it's interesting. Like I told the guy, I said, even if you just water this garden will reproduce every year. If you weed and you garden, this garden will reproduce to eternity, basically. It'll reseed. Some of them are perennials. There's a big English walnut tree back there. It was just like, wow. And then the news was that I've seen happen 10 times in the last 25 years in my life, where I've done a permaculture garden, and you even get like a water flow thing going. And some houses, I never did one myself, but friends have done gray water systems, and you can set up a little sustainable system here that costs no money. And that's my point, is that, see, money, this slave debt thing is that we're free beings. We're not even free beings. We're just I ams. And this is the I am as Craig, and that's the I am behind me of the red poppy. This isn't any normal kind of poppy, if you know what I mean, but it is a really important plant. And you can see by the complexity of it that it's more like a dahlia or a peony or a rose. And then they have a line on the bottom. I'll do a quick screen share on the bottom of the flower. I have a photo of it somewhere, but I don't have time to show you. But what you're seeing here is a little screenshot. And I'm going to show you what's on the bottom of this plant. It's quite striking, actually. So on the bottom of the plant, there's a cross, just like that, a purple cross. So if you're looking at the bottom of the plant, looking up, that's what you see is this. So they'll do the flower part now. Let's see if we can get this drawing thing. Oh, yeah, we can do a freehand one here. So you see this flower thing, it's the bottom of the flower, and it's red. So you're looking up from the bottom here. So this is the bottom part looking up. And so we can leave this now. And so we're looking at the top, looking down now, but what I was just showing you in cartoon view is looking up. So I turn this flower over right now, which I have a photo somewhere in my photo album. It's a dark, so dark it almost looks black. It's a cross. And you start to, the symbolism is just striking. You got a cross, which is a symbol of duality. It's not about Jesus or any of that necessarily, although, the Christians, it's a great system. And the cross is representing the horizontal and the vertical, or duality. It's yin and yang. It's sort of like the alchemists had their view in the West, and alchemy and the Christian religion sort of ruled the West. And we're all pointing at the same phenomena, which is why I say natural law. Oh, but I digress again. So the flower, to finish that story, is you've got this thing that's really complex. And then look at all the lines irradiating out from the central spoke there. It's quite striking, right? And then that's the plant signaling. The bees come, the pollinators come, and then their benefit is the nectar. And in this case, the poppy nectar. Every year I've grown these, which has been about 7 or 8 now, the bees preferentially go to this plant, and sometimes 4 or 5 in a flower. And there is a video on my YouTube channel of that. If you search for poppy bees or something like that, you'll see it. This YouTube channel has a lot of videos that I've just produced, and so it's in there, and you'll see the bees preferring this. And so they pollinate. That's sort of like the male sperm thing, and then that unites egg sperm kind of idea. New being is formed, and then there's each of these heads though might have, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 babies in it, or seeds. So if you, what's funny is when they dry, so right now when you get them, that's like the milk of the poppy time. It's very high opioids, great pain reliever. It's quite natural and an easy plant to grow. Like in our climate here in Santa Cruz Bay Area, it would sprout in March, April, depending on how warm the season. And it's like time and temperature sensitive. And then it sprouted. So in all my pots, so what I did was I dug them up, moved them around, and now they're doing this. And it was free. It didn't cost me a dime, just my time and energy. And each of us could have this. What I have at home here is a representational garden of all the medicines that are the easiest to grow, produce the most results for the least amount of time and effort. And let's see, that's pretty much it, Oh, and they're beautiful. That's the third parameter. They all have beauty to them. So this plant, you notice the head on top here. So when that dries, you can shake the babies out. So its reproduction method is that the babies are in this head, and it's like a salt shaker. And then eventually something comes along and knocks it over. So there's going to be another bloom next year when the rain falls, right? Or next time when the cycle's right. Usually it's a year cycle. If you don't really start your poppy seeds before now, generally it's too late because they like the increasing light cycle. So these babies then generate for the next cycle, for next year, right? And if you play your cards right every year, then one of the things I'm proposing is like a community supported herbalism, which instead of a CSA, you have a CSH. And then you prepay a farmer like me to say, grow next year's crops for you and say, here's a list what you can choose from. And you're going to prepay this, and you're going to get this much for your money. Or, next year, who knows where we're going to be, might be some other kind of money exchange system going on. It's really hard to say with the way things are, how fast things are changing, but I digress. So community dinner, this is the yard, and we had a little crowd here for gardening day. And so you notice the strawberries, there's a lot of those that came up this year. A lot of volunteer poppies, a lot of this plant greater celandine, a lot of plantain, a plant called self-heal, Prunella vulgaris. This plant is this beautiful purple orchid-like flower, and it's very aggressive. It's an aggressive seed sprouter, and overall, it can choke out anything. It could. That's why I planted it. It'll choke out crabgrass. Now, you don't want it to choke out everything else. So that's the thing, is you got to control this thing a little bit. It's like, it's a daemon. It's an entity in its own right. And once you get this thing started, it's like comfrey. You really get a plant like comfrey happy. I mean, wow. So they reproduce. The plant is trying to reproduce. That's its primary motivation. On one level. On another one, they're sentient. We just don't really realize how they're sentient. And like our cells have sentience, right? So it's like, fractal universe. There's different densities. Even a rock has sentience on some level. It's more of a reflection. Oh, but I digress. So I had a little crowd here, and that was what we were doing, was working on the garden. Like, here's some extra, a lot of shiso sprouts. So the temperature got warm, and then the shiso, or the perilla, Perilla. There is a perilla video on my YouTube channel on the herbal playlist, Herbal Tidbits, I think that's the one. There'll be a little video about Ian's garden here at this place at some point, just out the window here. And so we had about 5 people, and name one name is Paul Gaylon's one of my old community members here, having grown up here in Santa Cruz, and I probably met him 20 years ago, and so he's right up the road on Trout Gulch now. And so it's nice seeing Paul. It's like the legacy of like all of us that sort of stuck around from the 90s, and then some people from the 60s, 70s, and 80s are still around. They're probably smarter than I am, and they're hidden out up in the mountains. Being in public does take a toll, and a lot of the masters I've studied, some of the Taoist masters, they didn't live in the city. They would come into the city, but they knew what I know, which is, there's a price to be paid living in the city with all the densities and all the energies around us, because a lot of what we think is ours isn't actually ours. And that's one of the things I'm learning and teaching, because I've gone pretty deep down the cave of emptiness. And then there's a whole universe of many mansions in my father's houses. And so that's kind of the level that learning and teaching this process of how we fall asleep and wake up, and fall asleep and wake up, and how the plants have sentience, for example. And so how do I come back into form from emptiness? How does Craig function in the 3D inevitable world, as I've been challenged many times? And so a lot of what about first really living, embodying one's realizations, embodiment. And that's kind of what you see. Everything you see around you is because of me. Everything on this screen is what I created. This was an empty lot, piece of grass. The tree in the upper right corner, there's a plum tree. That was all that was there. So in just a minimal effort, maybe 5 or 10 hours went into this little plot. Maybe not even that. Look what you have. The complexity of what nature's producing. You've got strawberries producing berries, and they'll be there forever. They'll get watered and taken care of. And then the poppies will now seed out, and they'll resprout here. And over on the far right side of the screen, there's a comfrey plant, a yarrow, and a celandine, and they're all invasive in their own way. So they'll work out their own little, they'll work it out amongst themselves. That's what they do. just like humans do in community. That, you know, some plants don't like each other, and you can definitely see that. And there's some plants that like to be alone, and there's some plants that are aggressive. When you watch, you see that it's a lot like they have personalities, but they're just functioning in a slower wavelength, and you're much slower. So you have to really put in the time. And that's what I was trained, you know, my teacher, one of my teachers, and Michael Terra was my main teacher. I just love this challenge. He says, I'm not really into certifying people that don't want to, you know, work with the plants. And so I want to see you in clinic or have personal interactions with people. And then it's sort of like, you know, the oral tradition is this guy going to get vetted or not? And so I got vetted, and now I'm vetting people, because once you get vetted enough, it's like, I understand that world, because he said, you know, study 10, it was like 10 plants, I think, in one of his, it was like a personal talk with a group of us, you know, say like 10 plants, maybe 15, and watch them go through a year at least of their cycle, of the life cycle of nature. And so we start to see that like a year in nature might be a minute in our lives, just in the terms of like, you know, how fast. So you figure I can reach up what might take a plant a year to grow. I can reach up and do it in a moment, right? So imagine that whole journey the plant goes through, it's doing that. Because I've seen, you can break down and animate, you know, a plant growing, and you'll see like, you know, it's actually growing like that, you know, the Fibonacci kind of sequence thing. These things aren't growing straight up. They're growing like, you know, there's, if you look closely from the top down, you'll see. And so this little circular head on the poppy is twisting itself as the plant's growing underneath of it. So, you know, we don't consider stuff like that because we don't study process. But when you look, like I said, these slower processes that plants are growing through, they are pointing at phenomena that I call natural law. So there's a group on Tuesday nights, Natural Law. And right now it's going to go into video on demand at the end of this group. It's, you know, I leave it open to anybody. Anybody can join, come anytime as a seed. You know, the theme might be seed, but this particular community dinner talk. So one of the things I wanted to discuss tonight, but I'm going to do it just as a PowerPoint sort of thing now, is the sodium potassium pump. Now, to understand how important minerals are, because we can literally palliatively care for ourselves by just changing some minerals in our diet. And you can also get what's called cell salts. And there's like several ways to work with the biochemistry and the bioenergy fields of our cells. And that's one of the things that's being messed with, is the bioenergy of our very cellular life by these aberrant frequencies and electrocutions, if you will, that many of us are becoming aware of, because, you know, they call it the awakening. But in Arthur Furstenberg's book, is it Furstenberg, The Invisible Rainbow? I hope I got that right. I'm sure I'll get corrected at some point if it's wrong. And so in one of the chapters, I still need to finish reading it by about halfway through. And in the when the electricity was sort of getting interesting, it's like 1850s, something around there. I'm sure I'll get corrected if somebody enough people watch this, and that they did a survey of people that were electrically sensitive. And there was about 30% of the population, I believe, 30 to 35% were electrically sensitive. So I call those people the empaths, the seers, the ones that sort of lean in the direction of being, you know, like self-boundary is weak. And it's something that these type of people are challenged with, but it's also a gift, having sensitivity. Just for one of the reasons of my personal life, it was hard being aware of things that other people weren't. And you kind of, like, as a kid, you get pat on that, oh yes, Craigie. And then some of my prediction would come true though. And people go, well, how did you know that? Be like, I don't know how I knew it. I just knew it. And it's like knowing what someone else is thinking or what else someone else is going through, that also happens to a group of the population. They're also electrically sensitive. And there's lots of words and names for this subgroup, but I'm not going to put any labels on it because everyone else is doing it anyway. But so it's the red pill group, some of them too, but you got to be red pilled from being red pilled. See, there's a little trick in that. Is sometimes you have to become enlightened from your enlightenment. You have to become awake from your awakening. Because the ego inflation, the point isn't ego inflation. The point is actually the ego. That's why St. Matthew said, I die daily. You know, the daily practice at some point is like the hangman hanging himself is one of the images in India of non-duality. Is you undermine the ego by questioning the ego. Who am I? That became an inquiry I started at age 25, and I'm 57 now. So for 32 years, you know, it's an ongoing rhetorical question. Byron Katie and the work, if you look at that on the web, thework.com, or Byron Katie, the work, that's also meditative sort of self-inquiry. Who would I be without that thought? That's why people implant mantras. You know, music is a mantra to me. That's why I don't really listen to aggressive music much anymore, but more kirtan, call and response, inspiring music, uplifting music. I had a punk rock, heavy metal, hard rock phase that went from 15 until, you know, well into my 30s, if not into my 40s a little bit. And then I started becoming aware of like, it was actually the 90s I became aware of, like 20, 25 years ago. See, I was in my mid 30s. I started listening to kirtan music, and I went to a few different little call and response. Like the Hare Krishna chant is a kirtan of singing, praising God. You know, that's all it basically is you're praising God, you're praising your heart, you're praising your divine connection, you know, the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. You're praising the Father, you're praising yourself, and you're praising the connection, which is grace. And anybody that truly sees it, you know, it's grace, and it's out of our hands on some level, you know. And so by the grace of the divine, I rest here. And I don't need anybody to give me faith or belief, because I know because that's what's speaking to you. You know, sometimes I go, wow, I can't believe I just said that. And that's the ego in the backseat. That's its function, is to control the details, you know. And the plants are already doing it. Life is already doing it. We've just been perceptually slowed down, if you will, enough to dumb us down, so that's what they call the lost connection, but it's never lost. I don't believe anybody can really lose their soul, truly. It might get locked up into an artificial reality. And I've been offered my own artificial realities. In the shaman work, they might be called an inorganic reality, you know, like a leprechaun being would appear to me. And on a divinorum experience, open up this portal about 5 feet in front of me, you know, it's like, come on in. And I knew enough, even though the ego self was gone, there's another part of me that knew enough that I don't go in there without an anchor or a rope back into this other dimension. Because in the world of the fairies, it's well known, you know, if you get lost in the world of the fairies or the world of Avalon, like the Mists of Avalon stuff, if you're familiar with Marion Timmer Bradley's work, you know, it's like there's other worlds that exist, and you would summon the mist, and that's the land of the fairies here. And these leprechaun beings will open up portals, and different people have different versions of whatever their experience is, and these divine energies, you know, that manifest for us in this form to interface. No, wait, I ain't going in there. And so the AI world you see being constructed around you, you know, it's easy to get seduced by power and AI and control of, you know, data streams, and what people see and what people believe becomes very strong and powerful, because these things are very mesmerizing. I mean, I have to admit, I love coming back to my computer. I love it, you know, but also that's part of like fluidity of consciousness, is going, well, there's a preference, and, you know, preference isn't met. And then you look back to nature, and it's like, this is the TV set, you know, living in nature. Nature provides everything. We just have forgotten that, you know. And so this is one of those examples here in this sodium potassium pump. Is this nature's already performing alchemy, and I'm going to show you via this PowerPoint here. not really a PowerPoint, but. So what is a sodium potassium pump? So this is what you see as a cell membrane here. And the body is, see the potassium's inside the cell and sodium's outside the cell. So there's this pump. So there's an exchange pump. And so stress, we have four main alkaline minerals in the body. There's sodium and potassium, and they have sort of a teeter-totter counterbalancing effect against each other, a yin and a yang, if you will. And calcium and magnesium are the other two, and they have sort of a teeter-totter effect. Calcium has a lot of yang energy. Magnesium has more yin. Sodium and potassium, same thing. Sodium more yang, warming, potassium more yin. And so what we're looking at is there's a gradient. It's like an electrical gradient of sodium, potassium. Potassium's inside the cell. There's more sodium outside the cell, but they want to come together because there's a positive and negative charge. It's like a male and a female that just got to have sex, you know, some two beings that they just got to come together. You know, the attraction is, it's like that attraction. I hope most of us watching this have felt that attraction. It's quite, if you don't get too roped into it, it's quite a lovely thing, you know, to yearn, you know, or yearn for somebody. And so these positive, negative charges are yearning for each other. So as it says here, potassium is needed to keep the cellular potassium pump going, but high stress increases potassium loss from the kidneys. And high, we'll just say unproductive stress. Stress is inevitable. High unproductive stress also causes magnesium to be burned off because reactions involving ATP on the mitochondrial level, there's magnesium and copper controlling the furnace, if you will. You've got oxygen and iron in that furnace. And so what we've been brainwashed out of is like, hey, we need to control the furnace, folks. And it's magnesium and copper that are actually the two more important elements where oxidative stress sort of, you know, originates. And it's like the layers of the game and the brainwashing are almost unbelievable. And this is one example I'm showing you here tonight. See, when there's inadequate water to manufacture hydroelectric energy for neurotransmission, histamine is activated. Hey, people, allergies. I was a lifelong hay fever person, and I figured all this out. Histamine is also a neurotransmitter. And this is the work, what you're seeing here is the work of the biology of Kundalini, Jana Dixon. I've been trying to get a hold of her forever, but I've gone ahead and just used citations as best I can. This is just her work, and I've edited it a little bit and, you know, added some formatting so it's a little easier to get the most important stuff through because she's really on top of something here. So she calls histamine a neurotransmitter, and it's involved in this Kundalini, or what Kundalini is nothing more than life energy that's expanding rapidly. It's like plasma, you could almost say. So when this really gets going, then calcium bonds, see? So calcium has stored energy in it and it releases it. And that's why you have the bones as the store of calcium. See, the bones are a store of potential energy. So histamine has the potential to release this energy. So when you're dehydrated, keep in mind that, see, potassium should be inside the cell and sodium outside the cell. But when there isn't enough energy to keep this pump going, histamine becomes activated. So in Chinese medicine, this is kidney yang deficiency. This is adrenal insufficiency in the human way. And you could say endocrine exhaustion, which would also involve the thyroid and the brain. You could say pituitary, but you can't separate anything out. So you get your, so like upstream is like pineal, hypothalamus, then pituitary, and then pituitary interfaces with the thyroid, adrenals, gonads, or sex organs. And there's a whole endocrine chart that Henry Harrower developed. We'll give Harrower credit. Harrower's Harrower. Some of his work is well illustrated. You can even go to Google Images and probably see that the Henry Harrower endocrine chart from the early 1900 and 1920. And it shows all the connections that the endocrinologists today don't even bother to look at. which are quite shocking. But the first thing that needs to be fixed is the adrenals, and then you can work upstream from that to the thyroid. And once you get those two things running, then you can also look at the brain, and starting with the brain and working your way downstream. That's one of my teacher's methods. Either way, you got to get fast results for people these days and show them something's working within a month at the minimum, if not a few weeks. That's where the alchemy comes in. That's where the minerals come in. You can get someone's attention pretty fast who's mineral deficient and dehydrated just by getting the right mineral ratios in their water down. You get some calcium. You can basically boil eggshells and get your calcium water with that. And then you get your magnesium from the ocean magnesiums. I like the chloride form. You can put a little bit of that in, but you could use green juice. I don't know how much the equivalence would be of like wheatgrass juice, but chlorophyll is very rich in magnesium. One of the hidden little secrets is the chlorophyll blood connection and how close these two are. Plant blood and human blood is just about identical, folks. It's just that you got magnesium at the center of the plant blood and iron at the center of the human blood. And so it shouldn't be no accident that magnesium controls iron. So green juices can control iron overload, especially massive doses and enemas with it. Getting it up the rear end is just fresh green juice. That's why I have a garden. If I run into trouble and was diagnosed with cancer, and I know that I was out of balance for a long time, and where was I asleep, and what work do I need to do for why I was asleep? And so often in a case where there's a panic, where someone got into a state of anxiety about a potentially bad future that was thrown on them by the fear-based medical system, then we look at, hey, let's give you some minerals and some herbs, because you can get fast results with minerals and herbs. Like kratom, Kratom, you can get fast results with pain. I'm sort of sensitive to suicidal ideations. I wouldn't say they're mine anymore, or just the group thought thing, the Jungian subconscious. I'm also sensitive to, there's all kinds of energies and stuff that comes through. And so when I was in some downward spirals, I tried a little bit of green vein kratom, which it's not the upper that the white is, and it's not the lower that the red vein is, but the green was, there were some really dark thoughts this day. And within 5 minutes of this dose of like maybe a teaspoon and a glass of water, 95% gone. Very impressive. And my mood uplifted. And knowing now what I didn't know then, which really wasn't that long ago, about this iron furnace and iron and oxygen furnace thing, this is Morley Robbins, folks, of the Root Cause Protocol. And I bow to this man's work. His body of work is immense, of really, to me, uncovering, like when you look at the source of oxidative stress, everyone's looking like way, way, way too far downstream. If you're looking at cholesterol and all that baloney, you got to look upstream into the mitochondria and how many mitochondria they are and how fast they can reproduce and how many red blood cells have to be made each second, like 2.5 million. That's just incredible, folks, that our bodies work that smoothly and nothing goes wrong. Like I got a little wart right here that the fingers, and it's like, but out of all my whole being, it's like, wow, that's amazing that there's only this one little problem at age 57. And so back to the sodium potassium thing. I'm sure you're probably reading this anyways. If you're watching, or if you're just listening to me, then so chronic dehydration here, it says, making the body resort to scavenging energy from calcium bonds may also be leading a contribution to osteoporosis. Just think of all those dehydrated old, she says ladies here, but I would also include men with porous bones. And that's off her Biology of Kundalini, page 175, which is a PDF website. I don't know if it's still available, biologyofkundalini.com. That body of work, I just salute this lady and her body of work. And then see, magnesium is also essential to regulating potassium. So if you're extremely dehydrated, then, like wheatgrass juice could, pump you back pretty quick. It's like liver juice, believe it or not, liver, I know, but liver juice, it has that copper that controls this furnace, right? You pump that in, you pump in the magnesium with the green juice, and then you kind of have a vegan diet outside of that. And I think that, raw egg protein, especially egg yolk, would probably be, if I was really struggling with cancer myself, that'd be something I would rely on. There's lots of examples of this. I had a friend who had a bad leg accident and he had to have major surgery, and that was what he was craving, was just raw eggs. I don't know how many he said he had a day, maybe 2 dozen a day. He would just slurp down raw eggs, and he's walking now and beat the odds. You shouldn't have been walking. But that's the human, again, that's what nature can provide. I broke my neck, I've had multiple concussions and hundreds of traumatic head injuries, some of which were, on a scale of 1 to 10, probably in the 3 to 7 range, or the hundreds. And then there's maybe 10 to 50, above the 7 level. And there's a lot below the 3 level, just like minor hits of the head that were a clunk and ow, that hurts. But generally, would go away pretty quick and sometimes leave a little scab. So that's how we regenerate, is we control this free radical yang fire in the body by green juice, and in herbs we'd use bitters, like echinacea is excellent for hot blood where it's too hot. Yellow dock, another one you consider for when the iron's kind of going crazy. And then dandelion roots, another one that's very reliable, and artichoke leaf. People don't even consider the medicine growing around them. They eat these artichokes, and the real medicine of that plant's in the leaf, folks. I mean, it's bitter as all hell, but that's one of my main bitters because it's got a lot of good benefits for blood sugar and liver yin, and that's what milk thistle think. Artichokes are a thistle. So the thistle family is, I call it the Earth's FU plant, because it says FU, it grows thistles to keep the cattle and the people out so it can regenerate itself. It's the Earth's, middle finger plant, because who wants to be around a thistly, thorny plant? Nothing does. Little mice can skitter in there, and, small creatures use the thistles, and then the earth gets to regenerate itself. And that's one of the things that the subtleties of nature is. You see the wound, like, again, if you just look at this really quick, back to the picture that's behind me, this was bare soil. But why do you think crabgrass grows? Why do you think with the permaculture people call the pioneer species, why do they seal up the bare soil? Because from the earth's perspective, that's a wound. It wants to grow and have plants there. It's like its skin. Bare soil to the earth is like a cut on our body. It's the earth's life essence streams out and then finally dies, and you have to sort of bring it back. And that's the secret, is poop and peat. Actually, this guy out in the desert, in the Jordan desert, I don't remember his name, but there was a whole Jordan desert project. And that's what he started with. He put a couple of posts up with a place for the birds to land, and put a bunch of those up, and the birds land and they poop, and you're getting free nitrogen there. And then you dig swales, and anyways, I digress. So it's like humans are like the pump of nature. We're all a little bit of nature. And this is an example right here. We're talking about the chemistry, but this is a way to get fast results, is these alkaline minerals, because they buffer acids, and acids are irritating. Acids are part of rapid breathing. Acids are part of bones getting porous, because the calcium in the bones is a last resort for the body. It doesn't want to, our bones can be incredibly porous and also still strong, like a bird's. And that's the problem with the way people look at it, is it's okay to your bones get porous if you made mistakes earlier in life, because you can still recover the strength by exercising. And even if you're old and you've got the will, like I told you, this guy has had his leg blown off, and it's like, shit, he's walking, not well, but at least he's walking. Like, that's astounding to some of us. And I was told I'd never surf again 36 years ago when I broke my neck. And it was like, no, it wasn't even a consideration to me. It's like, of course I'm going to surf again. And I have my challenges now because of, your C6, your lower neck vertebrae, they interface with, it's a lot of nerves and things in there. So like, it's a blessing to me that I can even surf. Like today, I did not surf well. Like my system was not, I mean, I fell in every wave I was on, I think. So it was like, how, I think to myself, how could I have such a day, do so well one day and so horrible the other? And you just never know. And so for me, that's, it's a sign that there's too much acids, or, you know, the mineral thing was off, or too much caffeine, who knows? But so magnesium is essential. And so the fastest way to get it is through the ocean salts with the sodium removed. If you don't want that, you know, the diluted ocean water can work, but generally they remove the sodium. Then you have the magnesium chloride is the next highest mineral in ocean water when it's dried. So you've got sodium chloride is like 85%, and magnesium chloride is like 13%. And then the other minerals, you got the other 2%, like the really valuable trace elements that they remove from refined salt and give us the sodium chloride, and they remove the magnesium chloride too. And then they sell that off. That's why Morton iodized salt is a facade, because it's white salt. It's worse than white sugar because it's been chemicalized so badly from its original source. And they feed the cattle the waste product, and they take all the trace elements out of the salt. That's one of the little secrets that you don't hear about. So magnesium is essential in this, and then potassium is like in leafy greens also. So you can get a lot of magnesium and potassium from just leafy greens alone. And then you're getting a lot of sodium generally from animal protein. In general, celery is very high in sodium, and you can look up high sodium vegetables also. And then calcium is where, if you're eating silicon-rich foods, you theoretically can convert the silicon to calcium by transmutation of your gut bacteria. I don't know if that's been proven, but it is proven in animals. And there's a book called Biological Transmutations by Louis Kervran, 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 Kervarn, Biological Transmutations. It's quite a doozy of a book. And they did some studies, you know, on chickens and cows, and they don't eat calcium-rich food. So how do they grow their bones? They eat silica-rich grasses. The silica is what keeps the grass stable. So silica is kind of like carbon on one hand, but silica also has properties of really strength and flexibility. And stamina is one of those. So like oat straw is high in silica, and horsetail is an element that it's 25% of the Earth's crust, I believe. So an important element in the periodic kind of table of the elements thing, way of looking at life. And so silica can be transmuted to calcium because they measured the amount of calcium being intaked by these birds and by these cows. And it did not measure the calcium that was in their bones and they excreted by any stretch of the imagination. But they realized, oh, they're eating silica-rich grasses, and the four stomachs in the cow, somewhere along the line there, has converted the silica to calcium, and then the body takes it in and makes the bones out of it. And in the case of the bird, well, the bird has sort of a raw food stomach. And so the bird gut bacteria in the raw food enzyme stomach, which we have too. Humans have a raw food enzyme stomach. We sort of have two stomachs. And we're not told that either, but there's a lot of different types of stomachs out there, at least 20 that I have a slide of in one of my PowerPoints. And that's personal alchemy, which is a nutrition and sort of the alchemy of health. Is personal alchemy, and that meets on Wednesdays, and that's also, people can drop into that. We want to get an evening group going for that, but we need to get someone to run that group. So if you feel like you're a nutritionist and you'd like to take a shot at leading a group, then look me up. We're definitely trying to form, larger community here. And I digress. And then we look at this and see, oh, there's the adrenal glands I was mentioning earlier. So maintaining high energy levels. So an energy crisis in the cell through the lack of ATP occurs in the presence of glucocorticoids, prostaglandins, and cytosolic calcium, cyclic AMP. So what we're seeing here is that stress hormones and inflammatory compounds kind of cause a lack of ATP generation, and so can excess oxidation or not enough oxidation. So there's that iron, oxygen, copper, magnesium thing occurring in the mitochondria. Copper is part of a control protein called ceruloplasmin. And if you want to look that one up, and that's part of this, it's a copper-based enzyme protein complex that sort of helps control the iron-based reactions at the mitochondrial level. Ferroxidase is the one for iron. You don't hear about that very much either. That's basically because of the root cause protocol again. Ferroxidase, that's the iron controlling one. And then there's the copper one. And there's a few other in there that boggled my mind, just realizing that I could be testing for this stuff and just really help people get at root cause, right? So this is biology of Kundalini again, Jane and Dixon. The electric currents in living organisms flow simultaneously in two opposite directions. Ayurveda knows that, the old Chinese masters know that, they all knew it, and now we're just saying, okay, we figured it out too, because they're both positive and negative charges. So there's one force coming up through the earth, spiraling up through us into the sky, and there's a force from the sky, if you will, spiraling down into us and going into the earth. Centripetal and centrifugal. Think century, and then F-U-G-A-L or P-E-T-A-L. Centripetal or centrifugal. Two forces. It's like the DNA helix force. Just one's coming in from the heavens and one's going up from the earth. And that's just, so that's the way life is in this body called the human earth suit. Okay, well, this is more of a personal story, so we'll move along. The negative atoms behave like electrons and drag an entire atom along with them. So what we're looking at is, what I'm explaining is, before your brains really turn off here, is where she's talking about the waves that the electron doesn't carry energy along, just like sound doesn't carry, but it causes the air wiggles back and forth. So see, the sound wave moves continuously forward through the air while the air itself wiggles back and forth. So the moving electron does not carry any along, any more than a moving air molecule carries a sound wave with it, see? So the cells have to be more efficient and cohesive. And so she's basically saying that this mineral ratio is connected to our consciousness. And by getting our mineral ratios down and prolonging these, a beta state, right, that she's mentioning right here is a stress state, and the theta state is a restful state. So one's sympathetic nerve dominant and one's parasympathetic. And I'll tell each of you from, I don't know. So the sodium potassium thing gets dysregulated by stress. And what she's trying to point out here, if you can't follow this, you're trying to read this, she is, she's a genius. So you got to kind of take it slow. And I haven't read her whole book all the way through. It's hundreds of pages. It's quite an impressive body of work about the biology of Kundalini, the biology of how energy moves and awakens in a human. So a brief period of 5 to 15 minutes of theta restores the ratio to normal, resulting in mental recharging. So see, theta resets the sodium and potassium ratio in brain cells. The sodium and potassium is involved in osmotic transport that involves chemicals into and out of your brain cells. So see, what happens with me is I'll get nauseous if I don't catch this early enough. And then if I just lay down, sometimes for 15 to 30 minutes, just as the ratio says, if I can get that 5 to 15 minutes of calm, letting life settle back in, letting the brain, letting the emotional system sort of catch up with the day, it's my God time, I call it, then everything resets, I call it. She talks about scalar waves. I don't want to go into that here, but basically we look at ATP production from all you science-based people and changes in hormone and neurotransmitter spectrum. There's a bunch of ideas she's given here. And if you just pause it, I'm not going to talk about each one of these, but there's some really interesting stuff. And then this last little bit here is worth a look also. Basically exocytosis is excitability of the cell. So actually I will go into this a little bit. Wastes and salts take up increasing amounts of space within the cell. As a result, the cell's water supply is pushed out and the cell becomes dehydrated. That's why you don't want too much sodium-based salt, nor do you want too much potassium-based salt. Some of us need more sodium than others. Some of us need more potassium than others. Some of us need more in the summer. less in the winter. You've got to monitor this year round and learn the cycles, the natural laws of life. That's why I'm teaching this. So to establish cellular flows, you prepare and protect cell membranes with fat-soluble antioxidants, use negative charge North Pole water, and eat plenty of raw mineralized fruits and vegetables. Check into the North Pole water thing. I've been looking at that. And I wouldn't say fat-soluble antioxidants. I would just say use wheat germ oil, use raw, fresh oils. Do not use stale oils. Don't have stale nut butters. Don't have stale flour products. You know, that's one of the great secrets of oxidation in the body. These stale flour products have all these rancid polyunsaturated fatty acids that are very inflammatory, and people don't even realize it. And you will if you don't do it for a while, and then you do it, your cells will react. So that was a little sodium potassium balance preview. It's this pump that one other thing I'll say about it. Oh, interesting. Screen freeze? I'll have to edit this part out. And so we're going to end the community dinner with this idea of nature takes chaos, if you will, and makes order out of it. So, you know, if you go to the bathroom, for example, especially number 2, you know, most people don't want to look at that. They're sort of grossed out by it. And I used to be too, but for me, it's good information, especially when I've been doing the composting toilet thing. And you're just really having a look before moving on and putting the mulch over it. And then putting that back into the soil once it's been cured long enough, and or down deep enough so that a tree or a larger plant can get at it later once it's ready for that because it all gets mixed together into the soil, and so it's a great nitrogen source. So what we see is this reproductive cycle of nature, if you will, the recycling of nitrogen, the recycling of all the elements, potassium. When you see that NPK thing on your gardening bag, nitrogen is what causes the green growth, and then the phosphorus and the potassium are for the flowers and the seeds and the fruits. And so we have phosphorus in our body too, and it's bound up with calcium pretty much in the bones, but we have a certain ratio of calcium to phosphorus in our bloodstream, and that's another common blood test thing. And, you know, calcium is more yin in this case because it's solid, and yin is more solid in this case, and yang is more phosphorus, which is like the firefly. You know, the firefly glow is phosphorus. The phosphorescence on the ocean is phosphorus. ATP, adenosine triphosphate. There's the phosphorus again. It's yang. It's very yellow liquid. Orthophosphoric acid, the standard process cells, is a major medicine in my world because it's a sympathetic nerve tonic, and all that phosphorus gets in there and sort of can quickly restore energy levels. And then it also dissolves calcium deposits if you use it, you know, long-term more for a series of months. And what you want to do is have a good calcium source, which is their calcifood wafers, or, you know, bone broth. But you want to get that raw calcium, and that's in the protein mix, and that's in the calcifood wafers. So then we can work with the magnesium and the potassium and the sodium more in the liquids, and the calcium can come more through the diet. But if you need ionized calcium, then one little secret there is the lactate forms, LACTAT, and Standard Process has a great calcium lactate, which is a really another step to the ionized form, which is the bicarbonate form, not carbonate, bicarbonate. is the ionized form that our immune cells need. And that's not even been touted in any of the COVID literature, which is quite funny to me, is they don't talk about copper and how zinc imbalances it. And they don't talk about calcium, how important ionized calcium can be for our immune system, our white blood cells. They even use calcium, they can make this calcium wave, but I've seen these impressive electron little mini movies. I believe I could even do a presentation on it. I think I still have that material, or I know people that do. And it just, you see the white blood cells make these little calcium waves, like how dolphins, when they swim around the fish and they make a vortex and the fish get rounded together. It's quite a powerful thing to see. And then the cells that are inside there, they get weakened or explode, they lyse. In this lysis process, these cells inside the calcium wave get blown up. So it's quite an impressive thing to see how calcium is used. And, long-term, I know I'm not a big believer in using calcium long-term, but it is a major thing for viruses and herpes. And you can't believe how effective this calcium lactate can be. I've always got some on hand. And if you need to, if you have diarrhea, then calcium is great to slow down the bowels too. Slow down your bowels if you use enough of it. So, you can just play with your calcium magnesium ratio and your sodium potassium ratio. And cream of tartar is a great concentrated potassium source. So are most green juices. And then celery juice, if you want to do a vegan source of sodium without having to take salt, it's a pretty good sodium source. And then I use the raw Celtic salts because they're inherently raw because they're not processed. And then the impressive thing about the Celtic salts is you'll see little veins of green algae if you get a big chunk of the crystal. And there's living algae protein sodium complexes in there that just blow my mind. The crystalline structure of real salt. The sunlight's been captured. Sol, S-O-L, sol, soleil, for sunlight captured in the water, the ocean water, and then dried in these crystals is quite impressive. And then, the Himalayan salts, I don't support anymore because we don't know how pure the ones are or who's selling what brand and have they done contaminations tests. And I don't believe they have. And so Trader Joe's and Costco, I'll pick on right away. We don't know the quality of those salts. So I would just out them right away. As a general rule, although I have seen high quality products go through those stores, I don't trust their pink salt as a general context. And then salt, it's an interesting one. You can get raw ocean salt, you're doing pretty good. Oh, look at that, I disappeared. There's alchemy for you. And we're going to get back to the more live community dinner talks, but if anybody does want to leave a comment and let me know if there's any preference, whether you like the canned material. And but next week, we're going to bring this into next week's group and we're going to have a discussion around this. And I might invite Carl Merritt and Paul Gaylon might host next week. So he's one of our local nutrition sort of experts and health fun guy, professional that, Paul, so we might have a nice discussion in his place next week. Have a great week, folks. Sodium potassium pump, the magicians of life, Poppy energy. This was a really great talk. Good night.